Hi, this is a brief video on identity and gifted learners to supplement your readings and kind of help you apply a psychological lens to what we think about when we're thinking about gifted kids and how their identity may influence their participation in gifted programs. So first of all, when we talk about identity, we each have many identities. I bet you could fill in that blank with fill in each one of those dots with a description about yourself that someone could apply or ascribe to you based on your identity. So let's think about it. Where does our identity come from? Well, Bronfenbrenner's ecological model of development says that everything starts with the individual. So we have the child in the center there, and then you'll see 4 circles around it. Home, and they used to say religious setting, but we could say cultural setting as well now. Neighborhood and school. And you'll see that interacts the closest with the child because those are the people that will have the most influence on the child as they grow up and they interact the most with the child. That's in our microsystem. However, that doesn't just occur in a vacuum, right? So teachers and peers, they happen in what's called the mesosystem. The school is a part of the mesosystem. The neighborhood, your home, where you live, that's all part of the mesosystem, which, the neighborhood determines who are your neighbors. Your school determines who do you go to school with, what kind of teachers, where do you go. Your religious or cultural setting, same thing. If you belong to a certain religion, then you're going to interact with certain individuals and in a religious setting that you might not otherwise. All of those take place in an exosystem, which is sort of like, if you zoom out layer by layer. So the school board and your local government, that really has a lot of influence over your school and the rules and the things that they think are important there. Local industry may also play some part of that. Local industry and local government influence the parent's workplace, which then probably influences the neighborhood and where you live and where the child lives. And so all of those things kind of influence one another. And then the last one is the macrosystem. That's the society in which all of these things take place. So if we live here in the United States, we have certain beliefs and ideologies that are unique to the United States. And so all of those layers interact on the child's development, and that includes identity. So who are you? I picked 3 major areas, personal, professional, and society, to ask you to think about yourself. How is your identity different from with your family and your friends? Jokingly, I occasionally make my kids call me Dr. Mom, but usually I'm just mom to them. Even professionally, sometimes I'm Dr. Tony, sometimes I'm Dr. Szymanski, sometimes I'm just Tony. When I publish, I'm Dr. Antonia Szymanski. So, different identities that way. And then society, how does society see you? Society would see me as female, white, and middle-aged, and therefore would ascribe things to me. But if they, if you see me at Home Depot in my sweats and, a t-shirt versus seeing me in a university in a suit, those are different identities, and we respond to one another based on those identities. Gifted kids also have identities. Let me go back here. So, they might be one way at home and another way at school, or one way with teachers or a specific teacher and another way with different kids, different classmates. And so it's really important that when we're thinking about gifted ed, we think about the different identities kids take on and what might be influencing them. Erickson said that we go through multiple identity crises. I focused on 3 here because this is kind of the area that we're looking at, usually like the K-12 setting. And at the bottom, you'll see I wrote, what keeps me successful? And by successful, I mean, makes me feel okay with myself, makes me feel good about myself. And you'll notice in childhood, the crisis is industry versus inferiority. This is where kids want to do it themselves, whether it's tie their shoes, make their breakfast, set the table. They want to be the line leader at school or the pencil sharpener. They really want to feel like they are contributing to the group. And if they're not allowed to, then they develop an inferiority identity. I can't do it. I can't do it right. I can't do it on my own. And this is something that kids struggle with. A gifted child might feel exceptionally industrious and want to do things. They could also feel inferior because they are more aware of what the end result, quote unquote, should look like, or how adults do things. And, their little hands and bodies might not be developed to the point where they can do it yet. And so they may feel inferior and therefore get frustrated and not even try. Again, going back to that, what keeps me successful? In adolescence, the crisis is identity versus confusion. Are you going to just pick one thing and stick with it, one identity, or do you try a lot out? This is also where peers become more important than parents, which PS is pretty terrifying for parents. So you'll see a lot of kids trying out different social identities, trying to fit in with different groups. They're into something one day, but not the next. And that's all normal in development. But you can see, the child who may have had all A's in elementary school and really been compliant and a teacher pleaser may suddenly stop turning in work or stop wanting to participate in classes or be labeled as gifted because they don't want to stand out from the current crowd that they're in. And the last one is emerging adulthood, and this is intimacy versus isolation. This is one that I don't think really ever resolves because we kind of always wrestle with it. When I'm talking about intimacy here, I'm not talking about a sexual partner, though it could be. I'm talking about making yourself vulnerable with another person. So allowing them to see the quote unquote true you or your true identity versus wrapping yourself in multiple layers and wearing many, many masks, which would be isolation. And again, as the gifted person and a gifted young adult, you're faced with some gifted people are able to go off to college and they meet people who like to think like them and have deeper thoughts, and they take more challenging courses and they really grow and thrive. Other people find that their brilliance, their intelligence is really intimidating to people and will start to dumb it down so that they don't scare people away. And again, that goes back to that isolation. So two big things we're going to talk about here real quickly is stereotype threat and acting white. And you'll read more about those in the readings on identity. Stereotype threat was coined or brought to our attention by Claude Steele. And it is basically being aware that you are a member of a group about whom society has negative stereotypes. And with that awareness, a fear is triggered that your performance on something is going to solidify or prove true those negative stereotypes. So that could be race. People think that, if you're not white, you can't do fill in the blank, be an amazing author. And so therefore, or you're not as smart as people who are white. So when that research has shown, when that is triggered prior to something that is labeled as an intelligence test or things like that, then people of the non-dominant race, non-white, do less well. And it's been proven in the labs for over 20 years. Another idea, stereotype threat, is gender. So preconceptions about gender roles. We all have heard girls aren't good in math, boys aren't good writers. So if you are the only girl and you are invited to be in an advanced mathematics class, that could be a possible trigger, and typically it's not surprising if they turn it down. And when that is also, any of these things are highlighted and then they're asked to do a performance, they do less well. Other ones are age, SES or poverty level, or even other things. Any issue where society says you can't because you're too old, you're too young, you're too poor, you aren't physically able. Wherever we put these limits, if that becomes an issue, then people will avoid feeling uncomfortable. Remember that, what does it take to make me feel successful? So if you don't want to prove this right, then you have even more anxiety. And sadly, what we know from research is that gifted kiddos are even more susceptible to this because they know how important a good performance is. And they're also aware of the stereotypes out there, so that anxiety is even higher for them. So they may just say, forget it, I don't even want to participate, I don't want to be part of the identification process, and they may just reject it because of that anxiety. So here's some ideas about, the cues, just kind of going into a little bit more detail. So, we have, things we talked about, minority, what society or the media is saying, if you're to this, whatever that might be, you're the wrong size, you're the wrong color, then the stereotype threat is cued. And so people, are aware of it. And then there comes what we call moderators or buffering reactions. So that can vary by the person. That can vary by the environment. So have we really gone out of our way to make it a welcoming environment where everyone is accepted? Have we, are there role models? Are there people who have gone before that look like me, act like me, come from the same kind of background, who've been successful? And then we have our consequences. So sometimes, it's the reaction. Research says if stereotype threat is triggered, that anxiety will make performance be lower. And so basically it's just, how does the individual respond to those moderators, or are any moderators available to help make them respond better? So for our gifted kiddos, are there other people who look like them? Are there other people who talk like them? Are there other people who are like them in some way? Have we made our gifted classes exciting and diverse, and we celebrate one another? Or is it all white? Or is it all girls? Or is it all boys? We need to really be aware of that, because it is sending a message to the kids. The other big one that you're going to read about in the Henfield reading is acting white. Acting white was brought to our attention by Agbu, and it's basically an accusation that is made against non-white students for participating in advanced academics and using standard English. Kids normally are accused of acting white by family, by their peers, or by society. Family, it's not as common, but my research has shown that there are kids who do receive some pressure from their family to not forget where they came from, to are you acting too full of yourself? Who do you think you are? Those kinds of things, because families are uncomfortable about students participating in gifted classes. They could be worrying on behalf of the student, what's going to happen to them if they start getting these ideas or interacting with these other kids. Are they going to basically leave the community? And that's what acting white, that accusation, is all about. It's the community's response to someone who's different. Peers are the most common. So racial classmates make the accusation because they feel anxiety. The student who's gifted and non-white is doing something different than they are, and so that causes anxiety. One of the boys in some of my research said his friends accused him of being an Oreo, looking black but being white on the inside, especially if he used academic standard English. And that really bothered him, because he said, why can't I be black and smart? And that really hit home to me. And that leads us to society, because as a society, we are the ones who foster these ideas. Like, yeah, why can't you be black and smart? Why is acting black not associated with standard English? Why is, ideas of a non-white person who's gifted, that's a surprise, that's unusual. We are the ones who are keeping that going, and that needs to change with us, of course. But that idea that, non-white people, quote unquote, don't do this, needs to really go away, because that fuels that thought process there. So what can we do? Talk to the kids, right? Be aware, number one. But let's really think about, we have these kids who may be racially different, gender different, LGBTQ, girls, boys. I mean, basically any way we can identify ourselves is a way to be different and feel different. So how are we going to help these kids that we know need this intellectual challenge, and yet we want them to feel good about themselves? Well, there's a few things, and these are just beginning thoughts. I'm sure you're going to have a lot more after you do the reading. But the first thing we can do is to be aware of it and to talk about it. When we're identifying gifted kids, we should use local norms. We should look at other kids who've had similar opportunities to learn and see how those kids are doing. So for example, you don't compare someone who's only lived in the United States for 3 years with, and with someone who has grown up in upper middle class, white United States their whole life, because they haven't had the same opportunities for learning. So we cast a wide net, and we are intentional about finding kids. We make sure that we're not just identifying the girls who are teacher pleasers, or the boys who are the first to answer, and that kind of research that we've looked at that. We need to be really intentional about finding diverse learners. We also need to support the social and emotional needs of these kids. We need to talk about these issues in an age-appropriate way. And that can include discussion groups, using books and movies, having special programs. Hint, hint, you have programs coming up that you're going to be developing, but just ways to help these kids accept their academic ability as a part of who they are. And not just accept it, but actually celebrate it. Be proud for being smart or quirky or, whatever they are. Feel good about that. And then intentional grouping. We need to make sure there's more than one. Sandra Day O'Connor said that when Ruth Bader Ginsburg came onto the Supreme Court, it made all the difference in the world because she was no longer the only female. It took some of the burden off. She had someone to talk to, someone who was more like her. And so that is crucial. We need to make sure that whatever the quote unquote difference is, that there's more than one kid there. So whether it's girls and boys, different racial identities, different gender or different sexual orientations, different income levels, we really need to make sure that there is more than one and that we are presenting programming for diverse kids. So now you've had just a taste of identity, and you can kind of think about ways that could influence kids to participate in gifted programming and can influence their social and emotional development and needs. I'm really interested to see what you do with this information.